There are many jobs that can be automated with AI, although if the people who currently have those jobs lose income, they might make the world worse. So it isn't always going to be a good idea to lay off the people who could be laid off towards company benefit if the goal is societal benefit. Although a lot of the general public doesn't pay for the concept of abstract benefit, then we have circumstances where there are some products that are more popular than they are nutritious. And we can observe that people who have better access to nutrients tend to develop better. Better? What does that mean? Towards the goals that someone might have existing as a human, it's easier to accomplish those goals when you have better nutrients. Some populations are going to have habits or traditions around the type of nutrients, the kinds of ingredients they are willing to entertain. So what do you do about the population that needs to have income, otherwise they will make the world harder for the people who are maintaining essential services? What do we do with all the bored young men? What do we do with all the bored old men? Same thing for women. It's more common for women to end up in caregiver roles. So the question of what will happen to bored old women is often they end up as caregivers or slip through the cracks. We need to find more inventive ways to navigate an economy, and TikTok does that pretty well. The reasons I spend time on TikTok are generally rewarded by the time people spend with me on TikTok. Would I like to be able to pay my bills? Yeah. Will someone else make the world harder to exist in if I can pay bills and they can't? Apparently, the pattern is to prevent income. I'm not sure if that's preferable. In a separate thread, we need to find a way to care for the people who did not vote to turn off the genocide machine. What do we do when that population is older and the genocide machine is still not off? Like, who's practicing care? Also, who can afford to have that kind of patience? There are a lot of people who currently work in tech who believe the tech industry is not stable and can automate work, and they aren't really doing anything to try to stabilize systems. And for a while, I was very frustrated by this, and I found it very confusing, and now I just need to move forward and navigate the systems that are still kind of falling apart. I do wish more tech people were better leaders. I wish that more tech people actually cared about the society that makes it possible for them to live cushy lives. And the other side of it is that there are a lot of people who are very talented who are homeless or living on peanuts. The solution isn't to threaten tech people's cushy lives, it's to make it more accessible for others to survive. And it is possible to increase the likelihood that others survive without threatening the cushiness of someone's lifestyle. Unless they are really, really taking, well, there are some people who are using a lot of resources, and there are also less resource intensive ways to live. This video is trying to find an upbeat way to say that I'm disappointed in a lot of the leadership that I've observed. And I usually don't complain about leadership specifically, I usually demonstrate why people would engage with the structures that I'm trying to build. Dozens, actually hundreds of people have engaged consistently with the structures that I've built. And it is possible to do this on a shoestring budget. So if there are companies that are trying to save money, they can first implement stabilizing structures on a shoestring budget. A lot of companies aren't. They're just blaming people for not being qualified for a structure that doesn't exist anymore. Good news or bad news is that a lot of the jobs that could be replaced by AI haven't been because there's just so much inefficiency and so many people are afraid. A lot of people are going to hold on to their jobs instead of doing the thing that would make it more effective. That's good for the people who have jobs. It's bad for the people who are still working and trying to survive. Because if there are essential services that are maintained by people who are having a hard time surviving, those essential services stop being maintained when the people who are maintaining them stop being able to maintain those systems. This might seem obvious, but a lot of people just haven't really been paying attention to the world. And it's frustrating. It's like, hey, pull your head out of your ass, please. But also, what we can do more consistently is describe reasons why people would be motivated to actually try. Why do we try? It's taken a long time for me to answer this question on my own, and I've found several answers. I'm thankful for that, and when I have the bandwidth to open the wonder, I do. That shape of wonder is pretty valuable, and I make it available when I can because it is so valuable. The takeaway from this video is that we can be more ethical in tech. The reason why we aren't applying automation to every single dimension isn't necessarily because the dimensions we want to be automatic aren't necessary to automate. I also post about this in other media. Why hasn't that system stabilized? Is everyone illiterate? It often feels like everyone is illiterate. Then I work with people who remind me that there are people who are trying to increase their capacity to understand their world. Some of those people can't read, so the literacy question is mostly a wonder about the relevant dimensions of meaning. How do we share what we share? What do we share and why do we share it? What, why, how, etc. A lot of jobs are mostly necessary because we are a social species and we need to have conversations with other humans to regulate our emotions. Interactions in some capacity. There might be outliers, but most people do very poorly in solitary confinement relative to when they're socially integrated and doing the human stuff that usual humans do. So the idea of growing a team is a good idea because we want to be able to have relationships with multiple people. The idea that capitalism requires infinite growth is mostly that we get used to things, and when there is stagnation, we can leave things behind. We can lose sight of what we actually value when there are dimensions of stagnation that are dominant. So, in a capitalist society, the concept of direction is generally acknowledged by observing capital. In other systems, other dynamics are observed, and they can fall into the same shapes of who concentrates the most of the resources. Like, who has the most currency and what do they do to maintain control over that currency is a pattern that can come up regardless of the form of currency. So it is a good idea to have multiple kinds of currency, and a lot of the infrastructure for the cryptocurrency market was laid before AI came out and is going to be a stabilizing factor for some dimensions of the economy. Different people are going to value different things, so the flow of currency in different regions across different demographics is going to happen differently. That is an extraordinarily complex system, and we can model parts of it by modeling emotions. And some of the things that we can do to regulate our emotions are very similar to the things that the economy can do to stabilize different industries. Various dimensions of this have been stress tested over the past couple of years, and some of them are suspiciously, well, some of them seemed opportunistic. There are different systems that we can use to model our current world, and quantum computing is an exploration of how we can model systems that we care about. Systems that humans care about for the sake of sharing time at a human pace. I would encourage you to find a group of people that you can maintain a streak with, and TikTok groups are a decent way to start because your algorithm clusters. If you spend enough time on TikTok and you make enough content and you engage with other people who do the same and you go live with people and you have conversations, if you treat TikTok like it's your full-time learning, growing environment, then you can actually learn and grow. A lot more people recently have been saying create more than you consume, and I would encourage you to explore that. Try that out. It's very easy to get into patterns of passive consumption that don't challenge you, and it's maybe difficult to notice the kinds of growth that you can achieve when you create instead of just passively watching. And I would consider reading to be a generative activity if you read with wonder. So when you hear me describe this language that I've been developing, it's a language system, it's a grammar that's meant to describe, it's meant to illustrate the shape of wonder and perspective and value and ground, etc. So as you're reading through a code base, or as you're reading a book, as you're reading structured language, what are the ways that you can navigate structures that you integrate, whether you project them or whether they are provided for you? How do you explore the integration schemes and the reasons why you might wonder while you're engaging with novel media? That language is pronounced swoop, spelled SPW. There's a workbench on my GitHub currently, and you should be able to ask a language model about it. Support me on GitHub at Spwashi. Cheers! I've been coding since I was about 14, and it's been about 15 years since I've started to enter the space, since I've entered... How do I say this? When did I start? When did I start? When did I start? And the concept that I'm actually exploring is what does it actually take to be an engineer in the modern context? Because the engineering courses that I took in high school began when I started high school. And those were relevant to software engineering, and I have gotten hired onto teams that have not cared about the relevance of my qualifications and then fired me because I wasn't who they expected. After like 5 rounds of interviews over months. So I'm kind of like, my qualifications are relevant for the skills that I'm trying to be good at, and those are the ones that I'm trying to get hired for instead of getting fired again. And now I know that my skills are valuable enough for people to have given me feedback describing that my skills have been valuable to them at specific times. And I also maintain groups that have been growing. And also I produce content that subjectively I believe is increasing in quality. Now it is possible to have fluency navigating a code base like you can have fluency navigating the notes of an instrument. But you can only have that, you can only share that language. You can have that language, but you can only share it with other people who know how to navigate code bases and believe you can apply those skills to instruments, or vice versa. One of the reasons that I spent so much time exploring entrepreneurship is because my father had a business meant to help other businesses grow. And at the time, it was primarily software-based. And I wondered how I could optimize a process like that. Then I wondered how I could make the optimization process more describable. And in that process, I discovered that curricularizing code bases makes it easier to market. So it's possible to market a code base by having it curricularized and describing why others would want to learn a structure like the one that you have. I wasn't able to apply this concept to my father's business, but I can describe it. It's part of the lore of why I've spent so much time looking for language and why developing the ones that I have has been so interesting. Interesting to say the least. Compelling? I went to college because I was curious how transistors worked, and then I learned, I noticed, I recognized when I went to class throughout the semester, fewer people would attend, and I wondered why. It wasn't that they were all failing because there was description about curves. So sometimes it was that we were all failing, and then after the curve, we all got a B or something like that. But it was actually that there are other ways to learn the content of a course, and not every single course in college is going to be interesting for the same reasons to every single person. So it is possible to want to learn the contents of a course, but not necessarily resonate with the structure of that particular professor, of that particular instructor, lecturer. And also, we do have a lot of resources online. Now it is possible for professors to structure their instruction knowing that online instruction exists. So going to lecture is going to provide a different experience than being like whatever has been posted online. The professor can have watched that. So really, your professor might just be describing how you can practice talking about the things that you need to describe being skilled at talking about. Because you can know that there is a structure on a test, and you can practice recognizing the structures of the test, but generating them in 10 years might be more difficult if you haven't seen someone care about them. When I describe structures about leadership or the systems that impact my attention, the things that I care about when I go live and I have conversations with people, and some conversation topics I have more patience for, and other conversation topics I don't. I am trying to grow as a human, and also, I can have a conversation about the reasons why it is easier for me to be patient sometimes for some conversations. Like during the interview process, I can say that it's annoying when people ask me if I know a language that's on my resume, and that's mostly because it makes me feel like they don't care about the resume. If we're having a conversation about how we can actually build towards a better world, that's a different shape of conversation. So now I hope that with the videos I've posted on TikTok and YouTube, someone can see my style and know that this is the kind of world that I'm trying to build, where people do have the ability to reach the audience that works best with their voice, and they can actually contribute their attention to systems that are trying to stabilize towards a positive future. I improvise these videos because I get exhausted by some topics and other topics make me feel energized. When I think about what's possible in a world where it's easier to explore engineering topics without burning out, I'm excited and I want to return to college now. Now that I can ask all of the questions that have already been asked and get a quick answer instead of saying, oh, okay, I guess I'll wait 2 years until I'm in a course that I don't even know if I'll be able to take. Part of my lore is that I wondered how transistors worked and was told that we would get to that in like a 300 level course. And then I wondered how I could learn faster and tried to improve Wikipedia and founded factshift.com as an attempt to make a version of Wikipedia that could be translated per paragraph per audience. In that time, it was specifically per learning style. So each paragraph ideally would have a version tailored towards a specific learning style. Since I've learned that some concepts are best represented by some systems that we've mastered depending on what our fluencies have been and when we interact with whatever modality. Lighting and tone and posture influence the ways that the ideas that I phrase come across, for example. So now factshift.com is a metacognitive playground, and you can use it to seed new ideas. And as we speak, as I make this video, I am currently running Codex, developing more towards the concept. I've been coding for 15 years-ish, and there are still things that I'm curious about with software. So it is possible to wonder about something for 15 years. And it is also possible to have that open source and describable and share wonder with other people. Not every person is going to care about the structures that you do, and some people are going to respond to different shapes of communication at different times, etc. The important thing is that it is possible to wonder, and wonder is a construct that is baked into a language that I've been developing for about a decade. That code is available on my GitHub and will be updated again tonight. Call to action, I think it was in my last video too, is for tech leads to actually start making groups on TikTok and building wonder in public about structures that can be shared and marketable code bases, because people are curious about syntax. There are language nerds out there. I am a language and syntax nerd, so if you describe interesting syntax, if it's describing an interesting product or extension, I'm going to be curious. And at the very least, you can make an interesting enough video to monetize your TikTok account, and that can be a way to motivate you to continue doing whatever hobby or whatever passion you have. And an advantage of being motivated is that you can be contagiously motivated. And an advantage of being contagiously motivated is sometimes it's really helpful to have other people who can uplift you. I really do appreciate my team. It's been a rough several months, multiple years. A lot of change has been happening in the space of software and the arts, and everyone who interacts with software or art. Thank you for all of the things that you do, team. Future, potential, etc. Cheers. So the concept is that if nobody can describe the features that you're supposed to provide, then nobody is going to be able to use the features that you supposedly offer. And over time, relative to competitors who produce products on the open source market, there can be feature decay, meaning people who interact with the product become less interested because there are alternatives, or the quality of whatever goes into maintaining that relationship diminishes. Software engineering teams like the idea of onboarding people and having them produce as much of the product as possible, as quickly as possible, although a software engineer can only produce the quality they understand. This does have a relationship to the amount of attention and the amount of context and the timing of flow. Like, if somebody is assigned to read a pull request, to review a pull request early in the morning, and they don't have the energy for it, then they might not pay attention to it the way they would if they're doing it when they have already warmed up into the feature. So the concept there is there needs to be some amount of internal marketing to describe what software is supposed to be able to do. And that makes it possible for other people to market your product to other people and also build software that's aligned with your goals. On TikTok, there is a group chat feature that has a streak pet unlocked when multiple people send messages for 3 days in a row. So you can use that metaphor as a kernel for software and share details about what you're building. Share details about whatever you're building with whomever cares. Then perhaps only the engineers who care about a specific dimension of whatever you're building will contribute. Although, ideally everyone on your team will be motivated enough to be building something at least on their own. Then it's the responsibility of whomever is trying to organize the team to consider which dimensions of the developed progress can actually be shared. And an important dimension to mind here is consensually exposing the dimensions of work that different members on the team contribute. Because not everyone is going to be visible in the same ways because of the shape of their voice or the shape of their work. To summarize this video, everyone has a different voice, and it's the responsibility of the team lead to find ways to expose the qualities that make everyone's contributions more shareable if they need that to happen. Also, it is possible to review structures of software to consider whether you can market those features. If even your engineers won't review your code, why would you expect anyone to use your product? Now there are enough libraries and languages that you should be using a language that your engineers actually care enough to read and write. There are thousands of companies currently flinging money at AI, just generating a whole bunch of code. If you are the kind of structure that cares about what your team reads and writes, then you can save a lot of headache. Hire me for roles related to director type positions, team lead type positions, senior engineering type positions. One of my concerns is that I can get hired as an engineer and start talking about leadership things, and someone can say, hey, you're not hired to be a leader, and I can say, okay, this problem will come up in a couple of years. Then I'll get fired, and the problem will exist for a couple of years. And who was right? No one. Everyone lost in that situation. So I am willing to be a senior engineer and stay on a team to stabilize stuff for a while. But I would need to be able to stay somewhere and stabilize things to be in that kind of position to stabilize things. I believe someone who considers scale will have considered their skills relative to AI and been describing how they update what they care about. So I've made thousands of videos, and this is what I've practiced. Alongside the other engineering software development skills that are still relevant and useful metaphors, learning computer science, embracing design as an arm of engineering. Cheers. Coding models have gotten better, and if you haven't been able to scale your team or income, then you aren't going to survive as a software product maker. Every time the models get smarter, you should be able to scale your sales or team size. If you're not motivated to increase your sales or team size, then maybe you shouldn't be in business. Cheers. GPT 5.4 came out today, so I asked for an audit of my code base and any easy improvements. The workbench that I'm developing is meant for prompting, and it includes a prompt engineering language that is self-documenting. The code base is self-documenting. So every time these language models get smarter, I can update the workbench and know that there are probably going to be improvements. And also, because I have planned specific improvements, then I know there are going to be improvements because as the language models get smarter, I feel a bit more motivated to implement things that I could. So the concept is you should be doing this with code bases that exist if you actually care about engineering. Because quality is a dimension that engineers care about, and you don't need to be an engineer. It is helpful to be able to have a precise relationship between input and output, and engineering makes that relationship pretty tangible and grounded in observable labs, discussions, etc. Good night. Anthropic released a report that describes jobs that are likely going to be exposed to AI. So, in the next couple of months, when people start to consider where they can save money, the ways we cluster tasks is going to be relevant for how AI is actually implemented. And here it feels pretty abstract. I mean, when we're describing the reasons why we spend time doing work, what are we incrementing about society? And do we actually have the kinds of relationships that we're aiming for? You can reflect on how your specific role relates to society, and having that conversation might be necessary for some professions to continue to exist. Software engineering involves describing the amount of logic that is socially acceptable, which can be frustrating for software engineers who study language that was socially constructed. Like web languages were socially constructed, and it seems like the socially acceptable, etc. Then you get fired for being correct about the ways algorithms scale, because we care about different types of efficiency in different environments. Find ways to describe how you motivate dozens of people. If you can do that, then you'll always have a role. And if you can't do that, then finding community that makes it possible to find that energy within yourself is necessary. The takeaway from this video is to consider how the roles that can be impacted by AI describe skills that might be valuable if shared developmentally with others. So if you're a software engineer and now it's easy to develop a lot of code, how do you relate to the process of developing skills over the years so you can describe that as a metaphor for another domain? You might not be able to tell a business person to listen to you ramble about algorithms that they could optimize, but you might be able to describe how you've related to wondering about difficulty. And you can also practice making the kinds of videos that people will listen to for this long, with the skills that you have as a person who has spent time developing skills. And you can also collect a skills folder with other people who wonder the same way with Claude. Think about it. Cheers. Pretty much every subject that has enough depth to exist with a name can be explored deeply. I'm not sure which ones don't have that property. I'm not sure which ones can't be explored that way. The idea of AI proactively making junior engineers worse is kind of silly because what are junior engineers supposed to be able to do? Are junior engineers supposed to care about things that we don't demonstrate that we actually care about consistently, like code quality? Like if we're just shipping features because we want them out the door as quickly as possible, are we actually considering what people can learn from in that process? Are we actually considering how our team can develop expertise while we're just flinging things out the door? The answer on a lot of teams has already been not really. There hasn't been a lot of thought towards team longevity, and those teams stop existing after a while. And a lot of the others are consistently developing and might not be able to grow faster than the people who are on those teams can pace care and value of time. Like literally, if they are caring as much as possible, is that sustainable? And if their goal is sustainability and they're doing that successfully, are they hiring? Maybe to a certain extent, maybe to a certain size. But once they're satisfied and they're sustainable, there isn't a lot of incentive for those teams specifically to grow. So what do we do about junior engineers not being prepared for the environments that we're developing? Well, we need to actually curricularize our code bases. And a way to make this time valuable is to try to refactor your code bases so there is a 1-to-1 marketability ratio, 1-to-1 code base structure to what you would talk about. And an easy way to do this is to build in public and have conversations about the specific structures that you release be part of your marketing promo. So this is the concept that I've been exploring with lore.land, and I've wanted to make sure I don't imply that roles can be mass automated. And the easiest way to do that is by describing how teams can sustainably scale their team size without blowing their budget and without reducing their budget towards sustainable income. And this would need to happen with a reasonable turnaround. So there are structures that teams can apply today to immediately get benefits that can increase sales of their current product stack. Assuming their current product stack is actually something that people would want to buy. Then there is a 2-year sequence that companies, teams can apply that matches what humans would want to develop into. So this is the idea that you need 2 years of experience in a particular language in order to get hired at a company, and I have developed a language specifically to match human learning. My major in college was learning and education studies with a concentration in applied learning science. So the idea that I'm introducing in this video is curricularizing your code base by learning something novel with your team. And that has the benefit of internal marketing. If there is a structure that you can learn together, it doesn't need to be the language that I've been developing. It could be TikTok. So you can start a streak, you can start a group chat streak on TikTok and have a streak pet and learn what that means for your team. And as time progresses and you reach different milestones, you can have conversations about what you're learning together. And even if you're just creating blog posts about what you learn day by day, month by month, or milestone by milestone, however you track that progress, the idea is that learning together is the structure that you can share. The time that you share with someone else is what humans can possibly share. We can also generate a whole bunch of code, but if nobody cares enough to walk through the features, nobody is actually going to care enough to navigate them. And the ethical thing there is to make sure that we aren't designing systems that exit human attention spans or exploit them, etc. The call to action here is for tech leads to actually care about the structures that junior engineers want to navigate. And the easiest way to do that is by offering a space where you discuss what you're building and you say, hey, by the way, there are learning opportunities that are specifically shaped for team development. So if there are structures that you as a junior engineer want to explore, then you can in a common space. And if there are dimensions that you can share and the structures that we have available, like if you can screenshot what you're working on or make a video on TikTok and then share that with the group and then share stickers of what you've made, that's a shareable and scalable structure. So team leads need to start considering which platforms people are actively using. I'm on both Discord and TikTok with groups. On Discord, about 40 people are in my server, and on TikTok, I have a group that's about 30 people. So with modern technology, it is possible to scale communication so 70 people. I also have Patreon subscribers. So more than 70 people can be engaged with some structure. The frame of mind of fear of everything is changing, let me hold on to my job, let me cut off my nose to spite my face, like that frame of mind is not helpful. What's more helpful is to point out how easy it is to motivate people by being motivated, and we need to make structures that support the people who are contagiously motivated. And you might wonder, how do you make motivation contagious? Yeah, that's a good question.